Bug-Eyed Tales presents Story for Students, adapted from Horacio Quiroga's Cuento para Estudiantes. In a 19th century classroom, where grades and rankings dictate future success, a student navigates the cutthroat world of academic competition. Rising through a gamified learning system designed to pit students against each other, he faces a shocking downfall when one mistake can change one's self-esteem and future opportunities.
Imagine a world where the golden rule of teaching is, the teacher is always right, even when they're not. Exceptions to this rule are rare, and when they do happen, it's usually because the teacher wants to teach a lesson, not because they're admitting they messed up. This charade is transparent to the students, of course. The real challenge is for teachers to keep their mistakes under wraps while students try to follow the convoluted explanations. Enter the Faculty of Exact Sciences, where this system saved me from becoming a terrible engineer. You see, I had little aptitude for mathematics. But one day, our math teacher had a clever idea, a competition that would pit our egos against each other. We were divided into two teams, Carthaginians and Romans. The members of each group occupied ranks corresponding to their abilities. There was a free choice of allegiance, and I, being a fervent admirer of Hannibal's, became a Carthaginian instead of an Uruguayan. This was my only triumph of enthusiasm. For when the ranks were assigned, I found myself relegated to the 12th position. There were 14 students per side. Thus, out of a total of 28 mathematicians, only 4 were worse than me. My 2 Carthaginians from the last row and the 2 corresponding legionnaires. As you might guess, being labelled as a top-tier expert in mediocrity didn't exactly tickle my funny bone. So I made a stealthy decision to climb the ranks and become the unlikely leader of my group. To make my move, we instituted what we dubbed position challenges on Saturdays. In these battles of wits, a lower-ranked student could challenge any leader in their group to a chalkboard duel, testing their knowledge of the day's lesson. Each mistake by the leader would score points for the challenger, while errors by the challenger would cost them. At the end of the challenge, we'd tally up the mistakes, and the rankings would shuffle based on who outsmarted whom. On other days, the duels were inter-faction, but you couldn't pick on someone in the opposing group who was ranked lower than anyone in your own group. However, there was a wild card. You could challenge the entire opposing faction. I recall later on, when I was the top dog, a daring student, let's call him a decurion or a light infantry soldier, threw down the gauntlet to our entire Carthaginian army. That day I was completely clueless, and my teammates were silently panicking at the thought of facing such a well-prepared opponent. But upholding the honor of my rank, I stepped up. The result? A humbling 2 points for me and a crushing 28 for him. But that challenge came later. Before that, as I mentioned, I had my sights set on the top spot. The amount of studying I had to do was staggering, especially for someone with my limited patience. However, my bruised ego, the disdain of my peers, and the inspiration of Hannibal pushed me to fight my way up to the 8th position within the first week. Over the next 5 Saturdays, I took on the 4th, 2nd twice, and 1st positions. As you can see, I hit a snag at the 2nd spot. Twice. That particular opponent was incredibly stubborn. Once I reached the top, I had to hold my ground against the relentless challenges from my own supporters, my so-called Mahabals, who weren't thrilled with an upstart like me leading the pack. Eventually, they accepted me, and I earned their respect. I became so dedicated and vigilant that whenever confusion arose in class, my classmates, and even the professor, would look to me for the solution. It was a testament to how intensely I had been studying during that time. The disaster unfolded like this. A prominent public figure passed away on a Sunday, and when we found out there would be no classes on Monday, we were overjoyed. Perhaps not the most honourable reaction, but we were ecstatic. This unexpected day off led to a rather unfunny consequence. The algebra lesson scheduled for Monday was completely forgotten by most of us. By the next day, nearly 7/8 of the class hadn't even glanced at the topic. To make matters worse, our professor was in a particularly foul mood, insisting that we should always know the lesson, no matter who passed away, even if it were the Sultan or the Pope. You can imagine the tense silence that filled the classroom. The subject to be tackled was one of the many complex problems that the mathematician, Gilman, included in his algebra book. And to make matters worse, it was one of the most difficult. This became apparent later, at least to the entire class, as I, in particular, had managed to recall the problem the previous afternoon. I wish I had never done so. I was able to solve it and thus avoided the danger of the opposing side repeating their noisy triumph at my expense from a month earlier. I then spent the rest of the day, in my own way, mourning the deceased figure. The class began. We all put on our best faces, masks of indifference, a skill we'd perfected since our first year to avoid looking too eager or too nervous. It didn't help. The professor, moving at a torturously slow pace, called out the attendance list twice before finally looking up and calling out,
Sequera!
The one called upon responded with a slight attempt to stand up, saying,
I don't know.
The professor looked at him for a moment and then lowered his head again.
Bilbao.
Bilbao answered.
I don't know.
The professor also looked at him for a moment, and for a long time, in complete silence, the scene repeated.
Flores.
I don't know.
Dondo.
I don't know.
I've never seen cruelty like that of that unfortunate man. He didn't make a single gesture of displeasure, nor did his voice rise a tenth of a tone. One by one, the names came coldly from his mouth, and the responses were so uniform that the complete silence of the classroom, between the empty corridor and the filtered light of the lattices, seemed destined to forever echo with,
Mori.
I don't know.
Frades.
I don't know.
Gutierrez.
I don't know.
Ramirez.
I don't know. Finally, he stopped. 22 names had already been called, and no matter how intense his bad mood was, he eventually felt ashamed of his own class.
Perfect.
He said, breaking the pen against the desk.
None of you know a single word after 2 days of slacking off. If you had any shame, even a single milligram of shame, you wouldn't have set foot in this class, and you have the nerve to come here?
His gaze swept across the rows, leaving a trail of bewildered faces in its wake. Then his expression shifted dramatically as his eyes landed on me.
Let's see, Avila.
He said calmly. The class finally stirred, with students shifting in their seats as if the crushing weight had suddenly lifted. I stood up, becoming the unexpected savior of the moment. Suddenly, I felt almost revered by my classmates. In our shared predicament, no one cared that I was the leader of a faction. We weren't Carthaginians or Romans anymore, just a bunch of bewildered boys, or as the professor had unkindly put it, donkeys, who were still fortunate to be young boys. With my classmates' relief and the professor's confident, proud gaze following me throughout the problem's development, I presented it, reasoned through it, analyzed it, and concluded it in 10 long minutes with this result, which was correct. I put down the chalk and brushed off my fingers, while the professor turned to the class with a tone of lively disdain.
There you have it, gentlemen. If you spent less time on pointless pursuits and playing marbles in the streets, yes, I'm talking to you, and showed a bit more dignity, you wouldn't be giving such a pathetic performance. Learn from him. This is how you work. This is how you solve a problem. Well done, Avila, well done.
I sat back down, and the class erupted into relieved murmurs, grateful for the collective save, everyone except for Gomez. A boy with a flushed face, thick pimples, and an intense scrutinizing gaze, Gomez hadn't looked away from the chalkboard. Suddenly he stood up, his eyes still locked on the problem, and with a slight nod towards the board, he declared,
Sir, I beg to disagree, but I believe that problem is wrong.
One can imagine the astonishment. The professor's gaze quickly turned to the chalkboard, then to Gomez, and back to the chalkboard again.
The problem is wrong? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Hilario Gomez?
Yes, sir, that's what I'm saying.
replied the boy.
That problem is solved incorrectly.
Well then, step up to the chalkboard and prove it. But before you do, tell me, what do you think you deserve for potentially wasting our time with such a claim? Very well. Go ahead, let's see it.
The professor concluded, casting a predatory glance over the classmates of the poor martyr. Now, I don't know what on earth I was thinking, or how I could have made such a mistake, but the truth is that I changed the signs in a certain equation. Although the solution had been momentarily corrupted, as things progressed, the signs became inverted again, finally arriving at the magnificent result of the equation.
X equals 2 divided by the square root of ab, which is also equal to 2 divided by the square root of 225. And this further simplifies to equal 15.
Gomez, with his intense focus and meticulous nature, came across as a bit nerdy. He went through the equation with a fine-tooth comb, examining each variable and sign with unwavering concentration. Don't worry, I won't bore you with the details of his explanation. Suffice to say that his corrections unveiled a fundamental flaw in my solution. My calculations had gone astray, skewing the results. Oh. The professor, standing before the now alert class, realized he had unwittingly endorsed a significant error, exposing the fault in front of everyone. But far above the sarcastic smirk that was already starting to appear at the corners of my classmates' eyes was the professor's undisputed authority and infallibility. The professor looked me over from head to toe with the shrewd eyes of an old sly fox, seasoned in trickery, and said,
Bravo, Avila, bravo. This fits perfectly with your hypocritical and deceitful nature. But if you thought for a moment that I would fall into your trap, you're mistaken, my friend. From the beginning, I let you continue to see just how far your duplicity would go, pretending to deceive your classmates, feigning to be a whiz at algebra when you just showed us utter disrespect for it.
Well, from that day on, I never opened an algebra textbook again. Today, I no longer even know what an equation is, and from my former fleeting glory as a mathematician and Carthaginian general, I only have the memory of that final scene. X equals 2 divided by the square root of ab, which is also equal to 2 divided by the square root of 225, and this further simplifies to equal 15. It served as a lasting reminder that in the politics of the classroom, the truth often lies buried beneath the weight of authority and appearances.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support by liking and subscribing to the Bug-Eyed Tales channel. Your encouragement helps us spin more yarns for your listening pleasure. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
In a world where teachers hold the light and every word they say is right, even when the truth is blurred, their every lesson must be heard. The golden rule within these walls, the teacher stands and never falls, but rare exceptions sometimes show not to admit what they don't know. Instead, they weave a careful dance, a charade wrapped in circumstance. A lesson they claim lies within to mask the errors that begin. Students sit with eyes that see the contradictions subtly. They smile and nod and try to learn from truths that twist and sometimes turn. The real challenge isn't knowing, but to guess where logic's going, to navigate the winding road of knowledge not quite fully shown. Yet through this dance of quiet grace, where each one learns to keep their place, a game of words, a careful flight in a world where the teacher's always right.